Hey Eric, what's going on?
Not much, man. How you been?
I've been all right, doing good, doing good. I was thinking the other day that, for all the focus that we typically have on on financial independence, and less on the RE part, there's some discussions on our YouTube channel and on our Discord that make it pretty clear that a lot of people have an interest in talking more about retirement, and specifically because they're not exactly sure how to determine when it's time for them to retire. In other words, when they're ready to retire. And it got me thinking that there's like a couple of obvious categories as to like things that help people determine when to retire, like a certain age or just a financial target. But there's all these other reasons that are lifestyle oriented or otherwise. And especially given where you and Laura are with respect to her finishing up her job soon and you guys both reaching financial independence, what time is better than now to talk about this?
Yeah, it raises the important question: how do you balance the kind of mathematical readiness to retire with the emotional readiness to retire? And I think we all get to this point eventually, if you're on the fire path, where you're mathematically ready to do it. And that's an easier space to exist in than the sort of emotional readiness space. Now, I mean, it could be different for people who are working a job they can't stand. They're driving hard to a target date. And I may have been guilty of that a few times in my career and maybe in the past few years. It's certainly an issue that has a lot of nuance to it.
Yeah, it is. And, maybe there are a couple of very straightforward things to get out of the way because, of course, we don't just think about early retirement. And so you have, traditional age retirees.
Right.
They're often targeting a specific age, and whether that's because they become eligible for a pension or Social Security in the U.S. or some system like that, some kind of defined benefit plan. Well, that makes perfect sense, right? Many of those people have put in, 30, 40 years sometimes of work, and they have a very clear date in sight. And generally, barring kind of, life's unexpected emergencies, things don't really alter that path. But besides that, are there any others that you think about that are super straightforward and like, yeah, it's just like that?
Well, I think there's, just the timeline itself. Just because you reach retirement age doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to be able to retire. So I guess as I think about the kind of order of operations, I'm hitting all the mathematical stuff first. And it's funny because Laura and I we've had mathematical conversations for years now about our FI number. And as we get closer to the date, Laura has something like, less than 20 days of work left in her career. Those conversations that are really hard to have are the emotional ones. Like, okay, what does our life look like? And what I find us doing is we started working with Projection Lab recently. So shout out to Kyle and all the people that have been in charge of developing that. That is an amazing tool. And Laura has really been checking in with that. And what we both found at a certain point was we were so hyper-focused on the numbers because the numbers are actually kind of the easiest part to do. And we find ourselves kind of like reverting back to that instead of saying, okay, well, where are we actually going to move to? What's our friend group in retirement going to expand to? What are we going to fill our days with? And so I would say we could kind of walk through that mathematical readiness checklist pretty quickly. But I think that's a kind of very basic first step. They have to know, what your expenses are. You have to put some real numbers to it.
You do. And this is, when I think about the more mechanical and certainly financial topics fit in a lot of the mechanical area, topics that we've covered in our discussions here, so many of them are about that very thing. It's about setting your number and then, well, actually, what does that mean in terms of a budget? And then am I really thinking through just the must-haves and the nice-to-haves? And am I really devoting enough time to how much do I want to travel and setting that number? And I know for myself, just, being totally open here, that I think I put a lot of focus in my planning on like a number and getting to a number. Yeah. And a lot of the detail honestly followed in parallel with the end of that journey for me, or even after. And so I think, even when it comes down to like things that are high level mechanical, it's still just a starting point. And it's kind of hard to say, like, when have I spent enough time on this? Or, is it really one more year is going to be the thing I need to give me that confidence? I mean, this is something you guys have certainly spent time on.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. The one more year syndrome is real. And actually, I saw someone on our Discord comment on this idea that, who says you just have one FI number? There are people can have multiple phi numbers. And that's one thing that I love about Projection Lab is you can forecast out these different plans and contingencies. Like, okay, if the portfolio gets to this level, then you can attach some kind of like a spending, an expense to it. Like it's going to be a blowout vacation, or, maybe I'm able to do different things, helping my kids out with a down payment for a house or things like that. Yes. And so I do think that there's a way to kind of forecast out these contingencies, but also still pull it back into reality and really try and understand what you're trading this one more year for. Is it just a bigger portfolio, or is it sort of goal based? Does it lie in some rational thought process, or is it a little bit irrational? Like you're looking at the market and saying, and I know people are doing this right now.
Yeah, they are.
The market is overvalued. CAPE ratio's high. The market's going to crash, and none of us can predict any of this stuff. But that can be used as an excuse to delay retirement, and I think that is just a means of avoiding actually taking that next step into, and Laura and I are guilty of this too. Just, okay, what does that look like? Take the next step, because there's no way we're going to be able to make predictions about the market. Our sequence risk, you couldn't predict what your sequence risk was, right? So at a certain level, you have to trust the plan that you created, and then step into that really uncomfortable space of defining actually what retired life is going to be for you.
Yeah, you kind of wove a lot in there together. Just a couple thoughts. First of all, I'm glad you mentioned Projection Lab, because that's something I'm spending more time with too. But, on the other mechanical side, we do these scenarios. We use things like the, Karsten Jeska's Safe Withdrawal Rate Toolbox. Mm-hmm. And those are all really important starting points. And all of these scenarios we model are valuable. However, you're right that there's still very much a social emotional component there. And, we all watched you struggle with that for a variety of reasons. You called out a couple of them just there, but there is some genuine uncertainty, especially, a couple of years ago when we watched what the market was doing. The first thing you did was drop question marks on your FI date on the channel, because you're like, well, I genuinely don't know if the assumptions I've had about this growth rate, this trajectory are valid. And we've had a few people commenting like that too, saying, well, based on where things are now, I think I kind of have to add another year. And they're basing that, of course, on assumptions, on guesses, thoughts about overvalue. But I think you're right that sometimes, and I've had an example of this in my own personal life, where somebody approached me about this very topic saying, I don't know, like maybe I'm just cutting it too close. Right. Like, and you see them, pushing away from a date that they've been working towards for a while, but they've actually done all the math, and they're still trying to step back and say, well, maybe I'm not really secure to leave. And then you dig a little more, and is it really about readiness? Right. Do they not want to leave that job? And that's a totally okay position. But clearly sometimes this pushing back one more year, adjusting the numbers, is indeed about that. It's about what's being left behind versus preparedness for what comes next.
Yeah, for sure. I do think that emotional readiness component, that's a pretty complex topic, right? Walking away from a job, and, like Laura just finished doing the last ever performance reviews that she's ever going to have to do. And she was just like celebrating that.
Yeah.
You can relate to that, right? And just how
100%.
Awful those things are. I never had to do them personally, but they sound pretty dreadful. But then in the same space, holding the idea that, okay, this is also the last paper that I'm writing. And when I publish that, a part of me leaves too. And that I can feel the emotional tug of the intellectual stimulation that comes with the job. That's a very real thing. There's a lot of gravity to that. I think it's easier for me because I'm doing a transition period, and so I think maybe this is one of those things where if you have the chance to transition, whether that's dialing back to a part-time job or taking a longer sabbatical or an extended vacation, maybe using some of that vacation time that you didn't if you were in a really high-stress job, that there's some value to that, because I have been pulling back from work and finding like the space that's created there. I am filling it with other things, and I'm kind of testing out things. Okay, maybe that's not enough to keep me interested. I'm not going to be exercising for probably 5 hours a day. I'm not going to be that kind of retirement persona probably. but I do need other intellectual pursuits to put in there. And so I feel like, I think for some people that could be a helpful way of addressing that kind of, and testing some of the emotional readiness, because you are at some point going to move beyond your job. I mean, most of us don't work until the day that we die. And so you kind of do have to find a way of dealing with that. You never did that though, yourself.
Well, it's interesting. Those 2 points you made, there are aspects of each and I can identify with. Yeah. And the first is Laura's perspective. And that was, I knew my end date about a year and a half before I ended up leaving my job. Right. And it got extended by 3 months because of circumstances we've talked about. But so I knew a date. And so towards the end of my tenure, I started kind of like planning all these last things like, oh, this is the last time I'm going to go visit this team in this country. This is going to be my last customer visit. And this is, all these little things. And then COVID-19 happened. Right. And so I didn't get to do any of those things. And, I was fortunate enough to be safe and healthy and all those other things. But I then found myself processing this idea like, oh, all that stuff is gone. Like, I didn't even know that was going to be taken away. And I really started to think about, well, what does that mean? Like, those relationships are over now. I don't get to have that, scientific satisfaction of having that kind of closing out that chapter. But then on the other hand, I unexpectedly, as a result of the very same thing, had a short transition that did help me, maybe not to the degree that you're talking about, which I totally agree with, by the way, is probably a great plan for people who can do it. But I had to go remote like many people. Yeah. And so I had this 3-month period where I worked from home, and it changed a lot about how, like, all of us interacted with our colleagues. And so those relationships started to pull away sooner than they would have otherwise. It also helped me, I think, process the things that I cared about and would probably miss, and the things I really was looking forward to leaving behind me, because some of that stuff got worse when we stopped being in the office. Totally,
I could see that. Yeah.
So in the end, I find myself a little thankful for having that opportunity, because it helped in some ways. It didn't solve everything. I'm not going to paint it with an unfairly sunny brush, as I'm wont to do, but it did help at least a little bit in thinking through some of that stuff, because you're right. You're talking about huge transitions. And I think about people that have been working at the same company for 20 years or 30 years and the same people often. And you have to contemplate suddenly all that is gone. Yeah. Your identity, some of those relationships, and that's huge. Yeah. Yeah. So trepidation makes sense.
Yeah. I think people just tend to prioritize the mathematical readiness way over the emotional readiness. And, we talk about this a lot on this channel. Looking back now, can you see signs that you were emotionally ready to do that? Because one that I can think of, for example, is the kind of sleep test. I don't know if this has happened to you before, but, waking up anxious about money. That's a sign you're probably not, maybe the plan isn't quite fully fleshed out. You're not quite ready. And maybe you just need more confidence in the plan, or maybe your FI number needs to be bigger. Maybe you're just not accounting for all the things. Are there other things for you that were kind of tells?
That gave me anxiety?
Or that you were emotionally ready?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think that the number itself, I got very comfortable with. And, part of that was, I came to this idea of retiring early before at least I knew there was a fire community, even if there was. And so I think my naiveness about certain things meant I wasn't so fixated on them and worrying about them so much. And that was like very good luck. I think the other thing that helped me and Lori was we were, and we used to be, paying somebody to help us work through some of that financial planning. Yeah. And they helped give me a lot of confidence, because my thought was always, well, hey, this guy's pretty conservative. He's pretty open about that. And yet he's saying, based on these things that we've worked through together, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. So advice for somebody that's, approaching this and is feeling some of that, it's probably not a bad idea to do a check-in with somebody just on an hourly basis, a fixed fee basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll link to that episode too, because that's something you and I did pre and post FI was, you know, the 1K advisor episode. We did a financial check-in, and there's good and bad, and you know, strong suits and weak suits about that, but it can only help in my opinion, because that did help. And I know for Lori, hearing somebody else's opinion on how we were doing, whether it was our financial advisors we had before or this, you know, report from this hourly advisor, was just more information that didn't come out of my head and my work, but somebody who, you know, you're literally paying and who is credentialed to, you know, give you some of these advice, right?
I'm also wondering, did you notice in terms of emotional readiness, like, did you notice a shift? I've noticed this in myself and Laura, a shift with my relationship to spending from one of kind of scarcity to more of an abundance mindset. I feel like that's a signal that you are confident with the plan and that you are prepared to step into a retirement that's not going to be sort of gauged by real heavy spending guardrails. Like that's, I mean, and maybe someone wants to step into retirement and they have other reasons for getting there, leaving a terrible toxic work situation. And maybe you're required to be more frugal, but it's not my relationship with spending. It's not the one that I want in retirement.
Right. And I think one of the things, you know, one of the guiding principles that Lori had was not having our life feel
constrained,
much different,
right?
In a bad way, right? There are all these positive aspects of our life that we wanted to continue or increase, but you know, it was, I don't want to have to be micro thinking about budget. And I've been honest with you before that, you know, in the first 6 months of retirement, at least in my own head and somewhat out loud, there were times where I was focused too much on the minutia, because my sentiment could probably be summed up as, I believe in the plan, but we must adhere to the plan.
Totally.
Like way too rigid.
Very rigid, yeah.
So,
but also I think that plays into that idea of like, you know, you have to be comfortable with market volatility and the fact that sequence risk is real, but also, you know, you've planned a retirement that you're not sitting at the outer limit of a withdrawal rate where you're really testing that. I mean, you know, even Bill Bengen has been making the rounds on all the podcasts recently, like updating his numbers. It's pretty amazing. He had a fantastic interview on the Financial Samurai, which just really great. I can highly recommend that. But just talking about, you know, the 4% rule of thumb. It's not a rule. And 30-year retirement, we know we're going for longer than 30-year retirement, but you know, just go look into that research and understand that sequence risk here, yes, it's real and it's also unpredictable. It's not something you can control, but you can understand certain factors about it, like, you know, us using the CAPE withdrawal rate based strategy, right? That makes a lot of sense to me, and it doesn't mean we have to underspend, cut short the life spending that we've sort of worked so hard for.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's funny for me to, you know, I love looking at my spreadsheets at the end of the year, because not only do I look at that year that just ended, but I look at the previous years. And so, you know, now I'll have 5 years of data, you know, before too long. And I was so under withdrawing, and you called me out on it a number of times, as did some of our viewers. You know, it's like, hey man, I'm below 3%. That's awesome. Like, is it awesome? Like, is that really the goal? I mean, and we have some people on our Discord who are like, man, my safe withdrawal, my withdrawal rate is below 2%. And people will rightfully ask a lot of questions like, well, are you holding back more than you should be? Or is it like a point of pride? Or is it just you literally don't want to spend, like you don't need to, and it's like, well, I just accumulated more than I thought I would,
or legacy, you never know.
Something like that, right? But you know, the thing I found myself thinking about is how concerned I was about being below that number and substantially below it in the beginning, like saving for some rainy day that might come and some, you know, fraction of a percent likelihood. And now I have quite a few months where I'm over. And it's like, you know, that's going to be okay. And I mathematically can prove to myself it's okay. But I think more importantly, it's mentally, I'm getting much more okay with that. And that for me has been, it's pretty freeing, because I wasn't as much as I trusted the plan, which you kept reminding me, I trusted the plan. I still had anxiety about it, you know, And we talked to Karsten, we talked to Fritz, we talked to all these people, some multiple times. And, sometimes you just need it knocked into your head a few more times. But I look forward to seeing how you do with it, especially once your business isn't returning any money anymore, although I have a feeling it won't be tomorrow that happens. But, we all get to that point where it's like there is literally no other money coming in.
Right.
There is our investments that we are funding our lifestyle with, and that's what you have.
The last kind of emotional readiness marker that I kind of had was this idea of fear of regret versus fear of missing out. The when to retire decision sometimes is just, I could just let the portfolio grow and grow and grow. One more year at this high salary and man, look what this is going to be. But you also, I think a lot of people don't reframe the decision on what you're missing out on. And you talked about this in one episode in particular, where I think it was, one more year episode, and just framing that as all the things that you did in that past year, you wouldn't have been able to do, you wouldn't have the flexibility and freedom to do if you were still working a full-time job. And those things can be easy to set aside when you're heads down focused on earning a big income, or being really important in your position. And I'm guilty of that for sure. And I think part of this transition for me has been opening my eyes to the things maybe that I was missing out on. And I certainly want balance in my life, but I wouldn't want to use that as, a larger portfolio necessarily as an excuse for missing out on some things. And, we talked about health issues and friends. We're getting to the age, we're both 51 and we're seeing friends get sick and our parents are aging and, time is finite. And I think that's a real helpful thing to keep in mind when you're trying to think about the when to retire.
Yeah, I don't think you could say it any better than that. I like that we've had so many of these discussions and shared some of these anecdotes, because it's that much more likely I will remember them and challenge myself when I find myself on the other side of the coin. Because, Lori and I will be like, man, we love this kind of trip, and we can probably do 2 of them a year.
Right.
What if we could do 3? I'm like, man, if I had worked a year longer, we could have done that. But then you're right. I start thinking about like, oh, well, we did this thing and we've been up to, visit these people 3 times, and we were able to all go up with our son to go do this and do that. And there's no way all of those things would have still been true had I worked another year or 2 years or 3 years. Yeah, we would have had more money in the coffers, but at what cost?
Yeah. I just came back from a trip visiting my parents, and, my parents are aging. And one of the discussions that we had was about their budget. We're just looking at the finances, and the discussion came up, trips that they want to do. And it's a very different discussion that you have in your 80s, your late 70s, early 80s, than you and I get to have now in our 50s. And it's worth remembering that, tomorrow's not promised, but boy, when I hear my parents talk about having to choose between things that they're going to do with their remaining funds and their remaining time, it's very heart-wrenching. It's hard to hear. And I think just thinking about that with us and the time span, we're so lucky, so fortunate to be able to retire early and have all this time. And it may not be 3 or 4 trips like that a year, but man, you can squeeze so much into all this time that we're freeing for ourselves. And I'm really excited by that possibility. And I'm also a little bit afraid of it.
Yeah. There's something about, not having enough boundaries on a problem / opportunity that make it overwhelming. I feel the same way. I like the point you made, because, we've all got people in our lives, not just you and me, but anyone listening to this, where you've got a family member who would love to travel more, and for reasons completely out of their control, they no longer can. They have an injury, an illness, something tying them to not traveling. And sometimes that won't change. And that is, it is heart-wrenching, and you feel bad. And there are so many reasons that people are not able to do all of the things that they hope to do. I mean, none of us can do all the things we hope to do, especially the more of a dreamer you are, the less likely it is you're going to knock everything off that list. But you're right. To be even thinking about this question of when to retire puts you in a pretty fortunate position. And so reminding ourselves of that perspective can maybe help kind of steer us a little bit. So I do like the idea of making sure that kind of staying grounded in what we hope to do and what we're able to do might help us make that decision. I'm not saying it makes it easier,
right?
But you're focused on the right topics.
Yeah. So do you think we covered the when to retire? Have we answered those questions, you think?
Yeah, certainly we've hit the high points, which is am I financially ready to retire? And then there's, am I emotionally ready to take that step, stepping away from something that is known to something that is wholly unknown and in my opinion, unknowable until you do it.
I mean, for me, the win is, it was very important a few years ago. And now,
how so?
Just in terms of trying to escape client work, it was very stressful, and just managing a lot of things in the business that were not easy to manage. There was a lot of fear about, liability and things. It stacks up when you design homes for 20 years. It's like the liability is all out there, and when it's sitting on the coast and there's storms coming, it's a big, hairy thing.
Yeah, you're making me anxious now when I think about that.
Yeah, well, it is stress, and yes, you can protect against that with insurance, but I found that very anxiety producing. So, at that point, I was like, okay, it'd be nice to take some of that pressure off. And now I have something which is, relatively automated, relatively easy to run. So it's just a business that's kind of operating, and it's taking low inputs from me. And now I'm feeling a little bit less like, well, I don't know, what's the win determined by? Is it just determined by when I have no energy to put into it? Is it determined by what Laura and I feel like doing this year or next year? So the win is a little bit more amorphous, and I think it moves me to think about the kind of what thing. And
yes.
maybe you can agree or disagree with this, but finding that purpose beyond work.
Yes.
And
yes.
to defining personal meaning post-career for you, for Laura, for all of our friends who are stepping into this space, and what does that mean? What does it take to do that? And I think that those are harder questions to answer, but as I'm transitioning, I want to also, I'm taking the off-ramp here, and I want to take the on-ramp to something else.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I kind of started thinking about this in terms of like personas, personas you could adopt in retirement. I don't know if you can relate to this or you think this is a bad idea. You can totally mix this.
I'm with you so far. Keep going.
So like I'm trying to identify, okay, well, who am I? Or who could I be? And I think there's like the adventurer persona, which is like you're seeking novelty, you want to travel, you want new experiences, you want to kind of pursue all of those long deferred passions, like things that you're just like, you couldn't do a Camino when you were working, but you were able to do it now. And I don't know if that was like, I would think it was a positive experience for you, but I don't know if you'd do it again. Would you hike the AT? Like, so the adventurer is that's kind of like, that's top on my list. That's the kind of person that I want to be, because I've been in this office and heads down working. We've had kids, it's constrained certain things in our life. And so I want to kind of lean into that. I think the challenge with that is that, you risk overextending finances. Maybe you're overly packing your schedule. Like I was telling you, our travel schedule next year is like kind of crazy. And
yeah, it is. It's a lot.
And I'm like, is this just too much? Am I just trying to just run into the future and run away from something else? And just, I need to fill the vacuum. So I don't know. And it sounds like maybe you might fit at least partially that persona, the adventurer.
Yeah. I've never thought about it exactly in these terms before, but I think my persona is like the explorer.
Yeah.
Like I, like you, want new experiences. Yes. And I have found that travel is a very easy target, right? Totally. New cultures, new language, new food, new history, new literal physical places. But there's also the exploration of knowledge. Like I love taking classes and learning new computer languages and learning new spoken languages and just trying on different things. And some of these are things that I've picked up and put down almost at the same rate. And others I've come back to repeatedly, and some I've just continued on with. And like for me and how I'm wired, that's incredibly fulfilling.
Yeah. It's enough.
It's enough.
Yeah.
It's enough. And honestly, things that interfere with those things, I have a hard time conceiving. We've talked about even just doing the Friday thing at the winery. Like there's times where I'm like so deep in solving some problems. Like, when I was trying to program my automation for options trading, I was like, I don't want to go to work today.
Yeah.
Because I want to figure out this problem.
Yeah.
To the point where I like brought my laptop to work in case it was dead so I could get a little time to work on it. It's like, that's what I rather that day would have been doing. And so anything that interferes with that exploration sometimes is problematic.
So I also had one called the lifelong learner. That was another persona that I came up with. And I think all these are like gradations.
They are. They're fuzzy.
They're kind of segments of our personalities, right? And I guess what I wanted to do was kind of have this as a discussion just to kind of put out to the audience and say, maybe you could find yourself in one of these personas. So the lifelong learner was one of them. Basically, pursuing education, intellectual growth. Maybe you're taking courses, you're reading, going to workshops. Maybe it's getting another degree. Maybe it's pilot school. I think part of this is just, it's not only personal enrichment, but it's also just staying mentally sharp. I think we both have the need and desire to stay connected to something like that. And it's also nice because it does provide some structure, which I like, and helps me stay consistent and, always kind of improving. Another persona that I came up with, and maybe this isn't so much you, but the entrepreneur. And I thought, I don't have to really jettison everything about my entrepreneurial skills that I've developed over my years of running my business. And I think a lot of people treat retirement as a chance to start a new venture, whether you were considering like doing a microbrewery or something like that. You could start a side hustle, any number of things, right? And it's nice because it allows someone who wants to feel like they're being productive and maybe still earn a little bit of income on the side, but you can do it on your own personal terms. It's not defined by anybody else. So,
I like that one. And I do have aspects of it. And I think I hit it in two ways. One I've mentioned already. I have really enjoyed trying to develop options trading strategies for income. It feels like, winning to develop these strategies that are productive and learning from people who are successful. But two, and maybe this seems like such a simple thing, I've got a couple friends, both of whom have startup backgrounds as well. They're still working, but they live locally. We'll go out for drinks and we'll just brainstorm startup ideas.
Yeah, love that.
And if we came up with an idea that we felt passionately about it, I would be willing to contribute time to it and or money, because it is exciting to build something. And I do miss that challenge of, joining an early stage business or helping create a business and watch it succeed. I never have been a sole proprietor like you, where I developed a business literally from the ground up, especially by myself like you did. But unquestionably, I feel the appeal. And I find it hard to believe that you would be able to completely extricate that from your personality, because it's so who you are, right? I mean,
totally. I want to keep that as part of who I am, and I don't think it always has to look like this business. That's the cool part about it. I also had the hobbyist, and I feel like I think you're like a hobby kind of person.
I am.
And so you're invested in kind of a particular passion or a skill, whether that's woodworking, photography for me, gardening for my wife. I know Lori does that too. And you can kind of deepen your expertise in this kind of space where it's not constrained by time or just fitting it into the weekends or evenings kind of thing. And just become a lot more skilled. And I think that's pretty nice. It can also help with your, if it's not a solitary hobby, it can also provide kind of a social outlet. I don't know how much you can relate to this, but I had the kind of giver, someone who's like focused on volunteering or mentoring or, caregiving, because I think a lot of people do find meaning in giving back. I definitely think that has to be one of the kind of personas out there. And I think the risk here is that you risk overcommitting. And I've definitely heard people in the FI space who have stepped into FI and, retired early, and they've just filled their whole schedule with volunteering efforts. And I know Lori does a lot of volunteering, right?
She does. Yeah. It's super important to her.
Yeah. You want me to run through a few more of these, or have you heard enough?
I mean, I love these personas. I think it'd be cool to maybe share a few more, and then I'd love to hear from our audience about the personas they find themselves in or that they know they are seeking, right? I feel humbled that you have done clearly some really nice legwork here on developing a framework, whereas, I set up my camera today and I'm like, I have these 3 core ideas in my head that I want to get across. And besides that, this topic will be easy for us to talk about, but now I feel like a punk.
Well, you shouldn't. No, I mean,
you did some nice work. I like it.
Well, I'm honestly, I am working through this. And so I'm just trying to think of it from the perspective of someone who is in my position saying, hey, what am I going to do with all this time? And as a creative person, I have to have the creative persona in there,
Yes, you
someone
do.
who's driven to create and innovate and express themselves through art, whether that's, designing things or writing or music, whatever. That's the ultimate freedom to pursue these things where it's disconnected from having to earn money. I also had the health enthusiast, someone who's going to prioritize physical fitness, nutrition, overall wellness. I know Laura is really leaning into that space now, and I've really seen a big change in her, and she's excited to do that. And there's nothing like having all the time in the world to do that. There's also, I have to mention this because people gave me such a hard time the last time about my vacationing being so hard charging and my my need to check things off.
Right.
And it is a personal travel style of mine that I enjoy. And it's kind of innate to who I am. But I think there are people who look at retirement as like, this is the time to completely slow down. So like the leisure seeker. I don't know if I didn't have a great name for this, but
I kind of like leisure seeker.
Someone who values downtime, a slower pace of life, and the freedom from work stress to allow you to focus on the things like family and personal pursuits that you didn't have time to do before. Like I said, there's like overlap in all of these. I certainly plan on in January and February and March just kicking back a little bit, when Laura's in her early days of retirement, and we're going to take some nice vacations, and I'm definitely going to be in this category then.
Yeah, I think so too, and much deserved. So I like this framework. I think all of us will find certainly aspects of multiple things that fit us, but there probably is a core that most of us embody. And whether we know we're seeking it or we'll find ourselves in that mode post-retirement at some point, especially once you get past that initial hedonism period of sleeping in and crazy travel or like whatever you were missing out on that you're able to do, hopefully, you will. And then you'll figure it out.
Some of the other things I had on my list, like daily structure planning, the what you're retiring to. I don't have a problem with that, but I could see someone who maybe didn't have a structure might step into all that free time and just say, whoa, what do I do? Like, how do I manage this?
Yeah, that question comes up so much in the FI community of, do you have a schedule? How do you organize your time? And I suspect you're right. People like you who have had to self-organize as a solopreneur, you're used to that. But a lot of people's schedules are defined by work.
Totally. Yeah.
So it can be overwhelming. I mean, you saw for me, one of my solutions was unwittingly just try to fill that time as much as I can.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was failing if I wasn't packing it full. Yeah. To your example, maybe about travel.
But you landed on like a looser schedule, right? I mean.
Oh yeah. Super loose. And I think that works good for me, but that might not work great for somebody else. Yeah. And they might want a more rigid schedule. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it's not creating any kind of, I would say, emotional discomfort.
Yeah. If you check out that video, Retirement is Nothing Like I Thought It Would Be. We talked to Fritz Gilbert from the Retirement Manifesto. Amazing take on what a schedule might look like in retirement. He totally. I don't know. It seems like he hit retirement with such ease.
Yeah.
I'm kind of envious of that. I mean, I don't expect to have problems, but I can see there's going to be a few bumps in the road here.
There will be.
Yeah. And what persona would you assign to him?
He's got a few, I think, central things, and this is just from outsider view looking at his blog and our conversations with him. Right. There's this giving aspect.
He's a giver.
He clearly gives to the community. He and his wife have a charity that they've created that's so important to them. Yep. But he's also got that kind of the family man. He's able now visit his children and grandchildren and do these, RV trips and they ended up getting another home closer to children, and that's something that, while you're working, right, that's an impossibility because you have a work schedule.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say, I mean, you picked up on one persona that I didn't talk about, but the connector is one that I had, was someone who prioritizes relationships, family, and socializing, building and maintaining strong personal networks. If you read his blog, he is someone who is so giving with backlinks and referencing other people's material. It's a very giving personality. I really love that about him. And I think, I didn't want to end this without talking about the connector, because I think a lot of people can relate to that. And,
I like that.
If you're stepping into retirement and you are of an age where you have grandkids, this could potentially take up a lot of your life, and a really enriching part of your life. To be so close and spend time with young grandkids would be pretty amazing. I don't know. We're 100%. Not there yet, you and me. We got the hedonism period still way in front of us.
Yeah, it's charging ahead, and that's okay. This has me thinking of another conversation you and I need to have, and that's how will and when will you and Laura know that it's time to not just continue this ramp down of the business, but when is it time to stop? Because 100% retired. And that's a bigger conversation than it is in scope for today, but it's certainly something I find myself thinking about. Despite all the value I think there is in this idea of ramping down the business and you and Laura working together for fewer hours, there's still going to be a point where maybe you're done with it. Yeah. And how will you know?
I think for us, we're comfortable just kind of letting it run its course. I think if you saw how we operate this business right now, it would not look a lot like work to you. I'll just say that. Yeah,
that sounds awesome then.
And I'll say that's the plan for January. We're still hard charging a little bit here, but I think if you had eyes on that, it would be hard for you to distinguish between another, say, purpose-driven activity that you might pursue in retirement. And for me,
awesome,
I like that. And so if it ends up not generating any revenue, and we just decide to not renew any of the email marketing software or my website or anything, that's what it'll be. So I like the fact that there is a legacy there from the videos I've made and the content that I've made online that continues to inspire people. And I would like to build on that legacy for as long as it keeps me interested and excited. And I have plans to do more writing and update my books that I wrote a number of years ago. And, there is a part of me, this kind of, there is a giver in both you and me, in terms of this content that we're making. And I don't know where this is going to go, but the business serves a big function to people who can't afford an architectural education or an interior design education in many places around the world. And I'm pretty proud of that. And I wouldn't want to see it completely shut down, but it's no longer serving that function of, sustaining or trying to get us to a FI number. And that feels good in itself. So I'm going to let the decision kind of come to us and not try and put any hard bounds on it.
I like it. It's
a non-answer.
I think you got a better bow on it than maybe you'll give yourself credit. But I like that idea a lot. I think it's a very apt way to sum it up. And clearly, we both do have that giving persona, because despite what one commenter may have thought on the last video they watched, the show doesn't really make money. So we're not doing this as some source of hidden FI income.
No.
Clearly, it's we get the joy out of the conversations we have and enjoy sharing them with others. And as long as that continues to be the case, we're going to continue to do it.
Yeah. And if you've made it this far into the video or podcast, please leave us a review on Apple iTunes, please.
Yes. If you're one of those people that watches more than the first 8 minutes or 15 minutes, you're literally still here, and you're one of those amazing people that has watched every episode, we thank you. You can help us. It really helps the channel if you like and subscribe. It literally does.
But also, I don't know how you feel about this, Jason, but I feel so great when I read a nice podcast review.
Oh, yeah, I do.
It feels so good, and it feels great to read amazing comments that people leave on the YouTube video. The nasty comments, you can just keep those, put those on another channel.
Yeah, another channel will be fine. That would be great.
We're getting ready to head into Thanksgiving. We're recording this on the Monday. This is not our usual recording day, but the Monday before Thanksgiving. So I just wanted to thank everybody in our audience for all that you've done to support us over the years. This has been an amazing year for me personally and Laura, and just very thankful for the relationship you and I have, Jay, we've been able to build much stronger over the past couple of years. I'm really proud of this project, and it's just nice to have you on the other side of the screen, man. I wish we could spend a little more time in person together.
The feeling is mutual. When we get off this call, we need to talk about next steps for our spring trip planning. I too am thankful for the opportunity to continue to talk with you. Hopefully we can get our spouses back on, because I think they add a lot of value to our conversations. But
no chance.
I too am incredibly thankful for our audience. And if you are one of the ones who is hearing this thank you message, you're one of the real ones. And we appreciate you.
We do. Yeah.
We appreciate everybody who tunes into the show and shares it with people they think can benefit. But hey, if you're still listening, you're the best.
Happy Thanksgiving, man. Have a good one.
Happy Thanksgiving, man. Whether you're in the U.S. or otherwise, everybody be good to each other.
All right. Cheers, man. See ya.
Bye-bye.